Tonight,
there is no solution in the Senate.
the battle over the debt ceiling takes center stage in the upper chamber of Congress. Plus, the fight to keep kids safe online and the backlash Facebook is facing for not doing that. And a push for secession in parts of Oregon.
We've got a division in the state that is almost not reconcilable.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The high-stakes showdown over the nation's debt. Welcome to Faith Nation in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. Up until now, the battle over the debt ceiling has mostly been focused on President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. But today, a Senate panel took a look at the House GOP's recently passed proposal. And senators got ominous news from economists. CB News Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka is on Capitol Hill tonight with the details. Matt?
Jenna, the United States defaulting on its debt would have disastrous impacts on the American economy. That was one of the main takeaways from today's meeting. But that House GOP bill is also getting some low marks, so that means there's still no solution in sight.
With respect to interest rates and soaring debt, we are sitting on a ticking time bomb. Congress should be working diligently to avert an otherwise inevitable debt crisis.
Former Republican economic staffer Brian Riedel told senators that spending cuts and raising the debt ceiling can be passed hand in hand. But ultimately, America defaulting on its debts is not an option.
Hitting the debt limit would force an immediate 20% cut in federal spending and possibly default on the national debt. The effect on families, businesses, financial markets, and the broader economy would be devastating.
As Republicans push for cuts to raise the debt ceiling, the warning from Riedel was don't push so hard the country ends up suffering. The Senate hearing on a recently passed House bill came ahead of expected negotiations between President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy next week. The House bill slashes federal spending, including many of the president's priorities. But other economists warn the bill on the table would also hurt the economy itself.
It will reduce employment by the end of 2024 by about 800,000 jobs and add meaningfully to unemployment by almost a half a percentage point, putting the unemployment rate, which is currently 3.5%, closer to 5%.
Mark Zandi from Moody's Analytics told senators the House bill would meaningfully increase the likelihood of a recession.
We need to end this drama as quickly as possible. If we don't, we're going to go into recession, and our fiscal challenges will be made even worse.
The United States could run out of money as soon as the first week of June if Congress fails to act.
So all the barbs and attacks on the House bill today are meaningless. Everyone knows it. This is an opening bid. It's time for President Biden to stop playing politics and demonstrate real presidential leadership by negotiating in good faith. And we'll find out whether it's in good faith next Tuesday.
The Democratic majority in the Senate has no intention of taking up that House GOP bill, with Majority Leader Chuck Schumer calling it dead on arrival. So the clock is ticking. That debt deadline just about a month away. Jenna?
And Matt, how involved is Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell on this effort to find a debt ceiling solution?
Well, right now you could say he's on the sidelines. He's sitting this one out, but that is for now. He has said publicly that this deal has to come from the president and the House Speaker, and he supports House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. But President Biden and Mitch McConnell have a history of working together on issues like this one, so it's still possible that the Senate Minority Leader could end up playing a role.
Now, Matt, how hopeful do you think lawmakers really are in finding an agreement on this issue?
Well, I think privately a lot of optimism is there that nobody is ultimately going to let the country going into default, but nobody's going to miss an opportunity to take the opportunity to score some political points here. Democrats are going to point at Republicans and this House GOP bill and try to tie them to the potential spending cuts and job loss, while Republicans are going to point at Democrats and say, you're the party that's pushing the country to the brink, and you have all this spending that's going on. You're not working to cut it. So they're going to score political points here. And just to give you a sense of urgency here on the Hill, both the House and the Senate are already out for the weekend, and they don't come back on Tuesday. So the alarm bells aren't exactly going off just yet.
All right, Matt Gauka on Capitol Hill for us tonight. Thank you so much, Matt. And for more on this, let's bring in Mark Hamrick, Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst at Bankrate. Mark, good to have you with us this evening. So what does it mean for the average American if the country does, in fact, default on its debt?
Good to be with you, Jenna. I hope that we don't have to deal with that eventuality, but the discussion's obviously very relevant given the apparent divisions here in Washington, D.C. It would be, as Mark Zandi of Moody's said, something that causes an immediate recession and ultimately the loss of probably millions of jobs. And the problem is that that's entirely inflicted, and it's unnecessary. We can have a standard of fiscal responsibility, wishing that the government would do a better job managing its money, but causing a crisis because it hasn't done that is totally unnecessary. And I think there's an understanding among most reasonable people about that.
Yeah, whatever party you're in, I think most of us are really hoping that they can find a deal before the deadline. The Federal Reserve, Mark, announced another interest rate hike yesterday. What does that mean for the country, and what happens next?
Interest rates are higher yet again, and we've been seeing this rise in interest rates since March of last year, 10 straight rate increases of a variety of sizes and magnitudes. It's likely that the Federal Reserve is finished, but we don't have a guarantee on that because we need to see how future data on the economy, particularly inflation, presents itself. The Consumer Price Index due next Wednesday. But if it is true that the Fed is finished raising rates this cycle, then that means that we'll see a peak in borrowing rates as well as a peak in the return paid on savings. And many of the interest rate sensitive areas of the economy, which have buckled to some degree since early last year, may begin to see some relief if and when the Federal Reserve starts cutting rates, as many investors are currently betting that we'll see sometime this year.
New jobless claims are up again this week, Mark, rising about 13,000. And yesterday, the Fed forecasted a coming mild recession. What does that mean for the job market?
Well, these jobless claims, the new claims, have been bouncing around this level for about the last 2 months, but they're still at a historically low level. The number of claims that we're seeing being paid on an ongoing basis has been on the rise. I do want to note that it is the Fed staff economists who are predicting the mild recession. Chairman Powell was quite, I don't want to say adamant, but quite plain spoken in his assertion that he believes a recession can be avoided. So among the many things that are uncertain, when and if we see a recession in the near term.
And tomorrow, of course, we'll get the April jobs report. Mark, what are you expecting with that?
Further moderation expected there, Jenna, with the unemployment rate rising up to 3.6%, again, still historically low, but likely some of the slower jobs creation that we've seen over the last several years. And indeed, that's the forecast, barring even a crisis with the debt ceiling occurring in the near term. We do expect the impacts of high and continuing inflation, which is coming down from the peak, but also that combination with high interest rates continuing to tax the economy and slowing economic activity, and with that, the job market.
All right, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. Always good to see you. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
In Atlanta, the man accused of killing one woman and injuring 4 others in a Midtown Medical Center has been charged with murder and aggravated assault. 24-year-old Dion Patterson is the suspected of opening fire inside the center's waiting room. 39-year-old Amy St. Pierre was killed. 4 other women were rushed to the emergency room with gunshot wounds. Patterson fled after the shooting. Police say their camera network tracked him to a gas station where he stole a truck that had been left running. Law enforcement trailed Patterson outside Atlanta, where he surrendered. The suspect's mom told the Associated Press her son was a Coast Guard veteran who was suffering from mental health issues. Well, today marks the National Day of Prayer, an annual occasion established by Congress in 1952 and signed into law by President Harry Truman. Events marking the day have been happening all across the country all day, and this year's theme verse, taken from the second part of James 5:16, which says the effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. The CBN News will have a special 90-minute program marking the National Day of Prayer tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can tune in to the CBN News channel, the CBN News YouTube page, or the CBN News app. Kids' privacy at risk, the new allegations against Facebook, and how to keep kids safe online. Next on Faith Nation. And welcome back. Did the pandemic create an education crisis for America's kids? That's what some are asking after a new report shows 8th grade students hit a record low in test scores for history and civics. According to the data from the Education Department, only 13% of 8th graders are at or above proficiency standards when it comes to U.S. history. In civics, test scores fell for the first time since 1998. And back in October, a federal government report showed the largest drop in math scores ever, as well as a drop in reading proficiency. Facebook is under fire from the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC alleging the social media platform misled parents and violated the privacy of children. This stems from when Facebook created a messaging app for kids. The app was supposed to only allow children to message parent-approved contacts. But according to the new report from the FTC, there were times kids could connect with people who were not approved. The commission now wants to implement sweeping reform when it comes to how Meta, Facebook's parent company, treats the personal data of anyone under 18. The FTC's Director of Consumer Protection says, quote, Facebook has repeatedly violated its privacy promises. The company's recklessness has put young users at risk, and Facebook needs to answer for its failures. And here now for more, Melissa Hinson, Vice President at the Parents Television and Media Council. Melissa, welcome. So the FTC is going after Facebook. But is it just Facebook, or are others like Instagram, TikTok just as problematic when it comes to protecting kids?
Well, of course, Instagram is part of Facebook, but when it comes to gathering data on our children, they're all guilty. And I think they all deserve to be a little more carefully scrutinized. You know, we've seen this past week bills introduced in Congress, both the Kids Online Safety Act and the Child and Teen Online Protection Act. And I think those are both important measures to protect our kids, because there's a lot of dangers out there, not just data collection, but the kinds of negative influences that kids are being exposed to. And we're hearing all these horror stories about kids being fed content because of algorithms. You know, a child who is experiencing depression, and all of a sudden they're getting content encouraging them to commit suicide, or a child looking for a healthy eating ideas or inspiration or fitness inspiration. All of a sudden they're getting videos directing them into disordered eating. So I mean, it's really a big problem, and it's a good thing, I think, that we're taking a closer look at what these social media influences are and the impact of it on our kids and teens.
You mentioned the Kids Online Safety Act. I know your organization is supporting that. Tell us about that and what it aims to do.
Well, I think what the primary goal of the Kids Online Safety Act is to establish a duty to care. And there's this concept that if you see a potential for some negative outcome because of a product or service that you are offering or providing, you have a duty to try to mitigate those negative consequences. And what we are seeing with these social media companies, you know, there was a Facebook whistleblower that testified in a congressional hearing not that many years ago. It was only a year or two ago. That Meta has its own internal research that shows that they make body image worse for girls, that social media consumption has been linked to depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation in teens. So they're aware of the mental health impact of this product that they're offering, and yet they're doing very little, almost nothing, to keep kids off these platforms, and even in some ways sort of covertly encouraging kids to get on these social media platforms.
Yeah, I remember the statistics coming out about Instagram being especially bad for young girls. You know, Melissa, kids are smart, though, and while parents, they might put safeguards in place on their phones or on social media apps, a lot of times kids can find a way around them, you know, without their parents even knowing. What's your advice to parents today?
Yeah, I would strongly urge delaying getting that cell phone or a smartphone or internet connected device for as long as possible. You know, if your child absolutely must be online for school, make sure it's a shared device so you're able to check in periodically. But for sure, try to delay getting your kids a smartphone for as long as possible. And I think it's really unfortunate that parents are not being supported in this. I hear from a lot of parents that, you know, their schools may require their kids to have internet access in order to get their assignments, or they have to have you know, I heard about cell phones being used for your hall pass now. You have to have a cell phone to have a hall pass in order to, you know, go to the restroom or go see your guidance counselor. So we need to be putting structures in place to support parents who want to delay getting their kids online, getting their kids those smartphones.
Yeah. Melissa Henson, Vice President at the Parents Television and Media Council. Great to talk to you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, what some are calling a state civil war right here in America, where some citizens are trying to secede. Right after this. Some are calling it a civil war in one of America's western states. Growing political and cultural divisions have some wanting to secede from Oregon. In fact, 11 counties have voted for a split, hoping to become part of neighboring Idaho. CBN's Dale Hurd brings us the story of what's known as the Greater Idaho Movement.
Folks here in Eastern Oregon will tell you there are really two Oregons. They point to a mostly liberal Western Oregon and a mostly conservative Eastern Oregon. These two regions are separated by much more than the majestic Cascade Mountain Range. The western part is dominated by Portland, an urban bastion of progressive policy that prides itself on being weird. Portland is also plagued by epidemic levels of crime, drug abuse, homelessness, and mental illness. Because of its large population, Portland drives state politics. Portland's leaders have become state leaders, and Portland's progressive policies have become state policies. That's resulted in drug legalization, gun control, gender, and environmental laws being forced on the very conservative communities of rural Eastern Oregon.
All right, move Oregon's border.
11 counties there have voted for their officials to consider leaving Oregon and joining something called Greater Idaho. 4 more counties are expected to join them.
You know, if you stop and think about it, it's almost like a divorce.
Mike McCarter is the president of Citizens for Greater Idaho.
Do I agree with divorce? No. But it happens. And that's what we've got. We've got a division in the state that is almost not reconcilable.
Just over the Cascades in the Eastern Oregon community of Lapine, I sat down with supporters of the Greater Idaho Movement. All were concerned about how Western Oregon's liberal agenda was being forced on them and their families.
We're dealing with a state that is democratic and liberal.
We're Christians, and the social agenda that's being pushed by the Democratic Party is really more than offensive to us.
Our schools here, they're all going downhill. All the kids, their education is going downhill.
We don't really have a voice. They're silenced completely.
I'm tired of watching the state fall apart. I don't want it to turn into another California.
If I thought the movement was going to fail, I'd right now start taking more steps to get out of this state.
There are, of course, plenty of critics who say this campaign has zero chance of becoming reality. But the folks behind this movement feel as if they have no choice but to try.
We don't think we're wasting our time. The people that are voting for this don't think we're wasting our time. We see this as a solution that makes sense, is a win-win for everybody involved, and the people support it.
Matt McCaw is the spokesman for Citizens for Greater Idaho.
State lines have moved before in the United States, multiple times. So this absolutely can happen as soon as the elected leaders in Idaho and Oregon decide that it makes sense for everybody involved to happen.
The Oregon-Washington border shifted as recently as 1958. However, getting Oregon and Idaho and Congress to sign on to this proposal would be a tall order. One poll showed the people of Idaho favored a Greater Idaho by a 2-to-1 margin. The Idaho House passed a non-binding memorial welcoming talks with Oregon on the matter. But the Idaho Senate failed to act on the issue in the last legislative session. McCaw says there is incentive for Western Oregon to agree to the move. If Eastern Oregon leaves, it would give Western Oregon a supermajority to pass any spending bills it wanted. And wealthier Western Oregon already spends disproportionately more tax dollars on poorer Eastern Oregon. New Oregon Governor Tina Kotek, a Democrat, says she wants to heal the rift and has vowed to visit every county in Eastern Oregon. Kotek said, "I want to reset this relationship with rural Oregonians so that they feel heard."
Western Oregon leaders, governors, candidates have been saying for a very long time that we are going to listen to Eastern Oregonians. We're going to understand your concerns. We're going to give you, a seat at the table. It just isn't happening. As we see the bills that are coming through the Oregon legislature right now, we do not see Eastern Oregonians being heard or represented.
There are simmering or active exit movements by conservative counties in at least 8 democratically controlled states. And if the Greater Idaho movement fails, McCarter says the state has got to come up with a solution, but that his movement will have no part of civil disobedience.
Why can't people ask and vote for the government they want? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do it the legal way, not civil disobedience. Most of us who have a pretty good solid faith know that God's in control.
Dale Hurd, CBN News in Eastern Oregon.
Accident averted thanks to a Good Samaritan. Still ahead on Faith Nation. Finally tonight, a California man is being hailed a hero after saving a baby in a runaway stroller, and he did so just in the nick of time. Dramatic surveillance footage shows a woman tripping and falling when she sees her great-nephew's stroller rolling away toward an onslaught of traffic. Good Samaritan Ron Nessman saw what was happening and jumped into action, intercepting the stroller just before high winds pushed the baby onto the busy street. She must have forgot the brake. That is so scary. I'm so glad they're okay, and good for him. That's going to do it for Faith Nation tonight. Thanks for joining us. Have a great evening.